The autumn of 1944 had cloaked the northern landscapes of France in a bitter, unforgiving chill. But nowhere was the devastation more absolute than in the shattered remains of St. Lo. Once a vibrant crossroads of Norman life, the town had been reduced to a colossal, smoking graveyard of stone and twisted iron, earning it the grim title of the capital of ruins. A suffocating silence hung heavily over the gray landscape, broken only by the eerie howling of the freezing wind as it whipped through the skeletal frames of destroyed cathedrals and collapsed homes. The bitter stench of spent gunpowder, wet ash, and decaying debris clung to the damp air, a constant reminder of the relentless Allied bombardments that had crushed the Nazi occupation but left the city completely dead. Yet, deep beneath the massive mountains of white dust and broken bricks, hidden in the dark, freezing shadows of forgotten cellars and unstable basements, the true ghosts of St. Lo were hiding. They were the civilian survivors, mostly orphaned children, who lived like hunted animals in the freezing darkness, their clothes reduced to rags and their bodies shivering from profound hypothermia. These children had learned to fear the sound of any footsteps above, trembling in absolute terror at the prospect of military boots, their stomachs aching with a soul-crushing hunger that forced them to chew on frozen dirt and raw plant roots just to survive another agonizing night. Moving cautiously through this hellish landscape of debris was a small patrol of American soldiers from the 29th Infantry Division, their rifles raised as they scanned the blind corners for any remaining enemy ambushes. Leading the squad was Sergeant Thomas, a battle-hardened veteran from the rough streets of Boston, whose cold, stern eyes reflected a man who had seen too much death to ever smile again. Thomas was a giant of a man, hardened by years of combat, but carried a silent, heavy grief that no one in his unit dared to mention. He had lost his own young son to a severe illness right before shipping out to Europe, leaving a dark, empty void in his soul. As Thomas kicked aside a piece of charred near the ruins of a bakery, a tiny, muffled sob caught his attention, freezing him instantly in his tracks. Signaling his men to hold their positions, the giant sergeant carefully lifted a heavy, splintered oak beam, revealing a narrow crawl space where a little French girl, no older than 6, was crouching in total terror. Her name was Marie. Her face was completely covered in white plaster dust, and her tiny, frozen hands were clutching a headless rag doll with a grip of pure desperation. She did not speak a single word of English, and Thomas knew no French, but as their eyes locked in the misty twilight, the absolute desperation in her gaze shattered the icy armor around the veteran's heart. Without a word, Thomas knelt down into the freezing mud, reached deep into his tactical vest, and pulled out his prized possession, a solid, thick bar of Hershey's tropical chocolate, gently sliding it toward the starving child as a silent promise of safety. But the fragile warmth of that human moment was brutally shattered by the sudden, harsh crunch of heavy tires rolling over broken glass. A pristine military jeep splashed through the muddy craters, and out stepped Captain Vance, a highly rigid and arrogant Allied liaison officer whose pressed uniform and spotless leather boots showed he had spent the war behind a safe desk rather than in the blood-stained trenches. Vance looked at the little girl with cold, mathematical detachment, his jaw tightening with immediate disgust as he saw the American ration in her hands. Walking up to Sergeant Thomas, the captain unleashed a rispid, echoing reprimand, reminding the squad of the Supreme Command's strict logistical protocols. The Supreme Headquarters had issued an ironclad, unyielding mandate. All military rations were the exclusive property of the combat troops, and distributing a single calorie to the local civilian population was strictly forbidden, punishable by immediate court-martial. Vance argued with absolute coldness that every piece of bread or chocolate given to a crying French orphan was a direct act of sabotage against the war effort, a theft of vital energy that could cost an American life on the front lines against the retreating German army. He ordered Thomas to confiscate the food, turn his back on the child, and focus entirely on the operational perimeter, drawing a clear, terrifying line between the unyielding bureaucracy of the generals and the moral conscience of the men holding the rifles. The tension inside the American camp at St. Lo grew thicker with each passing day, as the rigid mandates of the high command clashed directly with the breaking hearts of the infantrymen. Sergeant Thomas could not erase the haunting image of little Marie from his mind, her hollow cheeks and desperate eyes acting as a constant, painful reminder of the tragedy unfolding just beyond their perimeter. The official orders from Captain Vance were clear and absolute. Look away, preserve the fuel, and guard the rations for the fighting men. But to the battle-hardened GIs who had crossed an ocean to fight tyranny, watching innocent children slowly starve to death in the freezing mud felt like a betrayal of everything they stood for. It didn't take long for a silent, unspoken conspiracy to form among the lower ranks of the 29th Infantry Division. It began in the damp, shadowy corners of the supply tents, where sergeantos and cooks exchanged knowing nods without uttering a single word. They knew the risks of defying the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, as a formal discovery meant an immediate court-martial, stripes stripped away, and a bleak sentence in a military prison for desvio of government property. Yet, the moral weight of the situation pushed them into a dangerous game of logistical defiance, turning standard combat soldiers into late-night smugglers of mercy. The operation was brilliant in its simple, calculated deception. Every evening, under the dim, flickering light of a single kerosene lamp, the supply sergeants would sit with their clipboards, systematically altering the daily inventory sheets. Boxes of heavy K rations, large tins of powdered milk, sacks of sugar, and crates of Hershey's bars were meticulously written off as lost or destroyed. They filled out the paperwork with creative, believable lies, claiming that vital supplies had been obliterated by stray German mortar fire, contaminated by damp trench water, or lost during chaotic night movements through the debris. In reality, these ghost rations were being quietly moved in the dead of night, hidden beneath grease-stained tarpaulins and empty ammunition crates in the backs of muddy supply trucks. The soldiers created a highly efficient, secret black market of pure compassion, routing the stolen survival packs away from the military grid and directly into the hands of local French nuns and underground orphanatos. The very boxes designed to fuel the destruction of the Axis powers were now being repurposed to keep the fragile flame of life burning in the chests of France's forgotten children. But playing such a high-stakes game inside a strict military hierarchy meant that discovery was always just a single mistake away. Rumors of the unusual shortages quickly filtered up the chain of command, catching the attention of the cold, mathematically driven Captain Vance. Suspicious of the sudden spike in mortar losses reported by Thomas's unit, Vance ordered the strict military police to establish secret checkpoints along the muddy supply routes. The atmosphere turned incredibly volatile as the heavy canvas of the transport trucks was routinely ripped open by stern, armed guards searching for stolen goods. On a freezing, rain-slicked Tuesday night, a supply truck driven by a young private from Thomas's squad was abruptly ordered to halt at a lonely crossroads. As the flashlights of the MPs cut through the thick mist, scanning the cargo hold, the hidden crates of milk and chocolate sat just inches away from exposure. The line between military discipline and basic human survival had never been more dangerously thin, setting the stage for a massive, internal explosion within the Allied lines. As November transitioned into a brutal, ice-slicked December, the weather in St. Lo became a lethal weapon of its own. The persistent, freezing rain turned the fields into treacherous bogs of deep mud and filled the ruined basements of the town with stagnant, ice-cold water. In the dark, damp cellar where little Marie spent her nights, the environment had become completely unlivable. The small girl, weakened by months of severe malnutrition and wearing nothing but waterlogged rags, began to shiver with an unnatural, violent intensity. Her breathing grew shallow and raspy, echoing painfully against the cracked stone walls of her hiding place. By the time Sergeant Thomas sneaked out his barracks during midnight watch to bring her a hidden tin of powdered milk, he found Marie completely unresponsive, her skin burning with a dangerous, delirious fever. The severe dampness had triggered an acute chest infection, and without immediate modern medical intervention, it was clear that the frail child would not survive until the morning light. Thomas held her tiny, burning hand in his massive, calloused palm, and the heavy ghost of his own lost son flooded his mind, transforming his strict military discipline into a desperate, unyielding rage against the cruelty of the war. Knowing that asking for official clearance from the cold command hierarchy would result in a swift, bureaucratic rejection, Sergeant Thomas decided to cross a line from which there was no return. He gathered 3 trusted privates from his squad, men who had also grown to love the silent little orphan, and initiated a high-stakes, forbidden rescue operation. In the dead of night, beneath a driving sleet storm, they quietly hot-wired a heavy military utility jeep from the motor pool, completely bypassing the official logbooks. Thomas sprinted into the battalion's tactical medical tent, knowing that the scarce boxes of penicillin were strictly reserved for American combat casualties coming back from the front lines. With his heart pounding against his ribs, he bypassed the sleeping medic, sliced open a locked supply crate with his trench knife, and confiscated a vital dosage of the miracle drug along with a sterile syringe. They loaded the shivering, semi-conscious little girl into the back of the stolen vehicle, wrapped her tightly in 2 thick wool combat blankets, and slammed the accelerator. Thomas drove like a madman through the pitch-black, cratered roads of Normandy, navigating treacherous terrain and avoiding active enemy artillery zones, risking a lethal ambush and a definitive court-martial just to get the child to an advanced field hospital. But their frantic, unauthorized movement through the sector did not go unnoticed by the watchful eyes of the military command. Captain Vance, conducting a late-night audit of the division's medical manifests, immediately discovered the broken padlock on the penicillin crate and noticed the sudden absence of the motor pool jeep. Furious at what he perceived as a blatant act of theft and a dangerous breach of operational security, Vance mobilized a unit of the military police to track down the rogue soldiers. The Jeep of the MPs, flashing its heavy spotlights through the thick, winter mist, managed to intercept Thomas's vehicle just as they were pulling into the muddy perimeter of the medical camp. Captain Vance stepped out into the freezing rain, his face twisted in cold anger as his guards drew their weapons, blocking the path of the exhausted infantrymen. Vance loudly accused Thomas of outright treason against the United States military, demanding the immediate surrender of the stolen government property and the arrest of the entire squad. Standing in the pouring rain, with the life of a dying French child hanging in the absolute balance, Sergeant Thomas placed his massive frame directly between the MPs and the back of the Jeep, his hand resting heavily on his holstered pistol as an incredibly dangerous internal standoff erupted between the laws of the Army and the laws of humanity. The clinical, sterile environment of the advanced American Field Hospital offered a sharp, jarring contrast to the frozen wasteland of St. Lo. Inside the heavy canvas tents, the air was warm and smelled heavily of antiseptic and boiled water, where a dedicated team of exhausted medics worked under dim battery-powered lights to patch up the casualties of the European campaign. Thanks to Sergeant Thomas's midnight run, the stolen dosage of penicillin was successfully administered into little Marie's bloodstream, slowly breaking the dangerous, delirious fever that had threatened to claim her fragile life. Thomas stood silently in the corner of the medical tent, his mud-caked uniform dripping rainwater onto the floor, watching the small girl's breathing finally transition from a raspy, painful wheeze into a deep, peaceful sleep. For the first time in months, a glimmer of profound hope flickered in the sergeant's weary heart. He had failed to save his own flesh and blood back in Boston. But here, amidst the senseless slaughter of global warfare, he had successfully held back the shadow of death for a forgotten orphan. But the sanctuary of the medical camp was completely shattered when Captain Vance entered the tent, flanked by 2 armed military police officers with stern, unreadable expressions. Vance did not look at the recovering child. His cold, calculating eyes focused entirely on Sergeant Thomas, his hand holding a thick, official folder containing the manipulated logistical manifest from the past 3 weeks. The arrogant liaison officer threw the paperwork onto a metal medical table, declaring that an official inquiry into the suspicious inventory shortages was now actively underway. Vance laid out the hard numbers with bureaucratic precision, pointing out that thousands of pounds of high-calorie rations, powdered milk, and medical supplies had vanished from the battalion's grid under Thomas's watch. He made it clear that the high command at SHAF would not tolerate logistical sabotage, and that using vital military resources to fuel unauthorized local charities was a direct violation of Article 86 of the Military Code. Vance gave Thomas a chilling, ultimate ultimatum: sign a full confession naming every cook and private involved in the smuggling ring, or face an immediate general court-martial for treason, which meant a definitive dishonorable discharge and a lifetime of hard labor in a federal penitentiary. The oppressive silence inside the tent grew incredibly heavy as the soldiers of the 29th Infantry Division caught wind of the confrontation and began to gather around the perimeter, their stern faces illuminated by the headlights of the parked jeeps. Instead of shrinking under the captain's heavy threats, Sergeant Thomas took a slow, deliberate step forward, his massive frame towering over the immaculate officer as he looked him dead in the eyes. Thomas calmly stated that he had not crossed the Atlantic Ocean to watch innocent, starving children die in the mud, while American warehouses sat packed with surplus butter and chocolate. One by one, the sargentos, cooks, and privates from the squad stepped into the light of the tent, quietly standing shoulder to shoulder with their leader, silently demonstrating an unbreakable, unified pact of defiance against the cold bureaucracy of the rules. They were battle-hardened combat men who had faced the elite divisions of the Third Reich, and they were completely unafraid of a desk-bound captain, turning a standard administrative audit into a historic standoff for the very soul of the American Army. The freezing rain continued to slash mercilessly across the muddy courtyard of the advanced medical camp, mirroring the dangerous, volatile tension that had gripped the men of the 29th Infantry Division. Captain Vance stood with his jaw clenched in absolute fury, his hand gesturing sharply towards Sergeant Thomas as he ordered the 2 stiff military police officers to enforce the immediate arrest. The MPs, however, hesitated, their boots sinking into the thick mud as their flashlights flickered over the battle-hardened squad standing directly behind Thomas. These were not green recruits. These were the men who had survived the bloody Omaha Beach landings and clawed their way through the deadly Norman hedgerows, their hands now resting heavily on their holstered Colt .45 pistols with unblinking, lethal gazes. The silence was deafening, suffocating the dark space between the soldiers and the bureaucratic authority, creating a historical internal standoff where an accidental discharge or a single nervous twitch could trigger a tragic, internal civil war within the American lines for the very soul of the liberation effort. Just as Captain Vance opened his mouth to scream an ultimatum of direct insubordination, the deep, thunderous roar of a heavy Cadillac command car cut through the howling winter wind, its headlights piercing the dark mist like twin daggers. The vehicle splashed violently through the deep mud craters, coming to an abrupt halt right in the center of the tent's perimeter, revealing the small, polished metal plate of a Major General mounted on the front bumper. Out of the vehicle stepped a legendary, grizzled commander of the division, a veteran whose coat was stained with the grime of the front lines and whose face was etched with the deep lines of immense responsibility. Vance immediately smoothed his pressed uniform and marched forward, frantically presenting the thick folder of falsified manifests, loudly demanding that Sergeant Thomas and his rogue, smuggling ring face the full weight of a general court-martial for the systemic theft of government property. The old general listened silently in the pouring rain, his cold, piercing eyes looking at the altered papers, then shifting past Vance to look at the exhausted, muddy soldiers who stood unified in their defiance, and finally looking deep into the warm medical tent where little Marie slept peacefully under the American combat blankets. The oppressive silence returned as the general slowly walked into the medical tent, his heavy footsteps echoing softly on the canvas floor as he stood over the recovering French child, watching her chest rise and fall with newfound strength. He walked back out into the freezing night, looked Captain Vance dead in the eyes, and slowly took the official confession sheets, deliberately ripping them into small pieces and letting the wind scatter them into the muddy trenches. In a booming, gravelly voice that echoed across the entire camp, the general declared that the United States military had not crossed the violent Atlantic Ocean to enforce starvation upon the very people they came to liberate, nor did they train their finest men to ignore a dying orphan in the dirt. He sternly ordered Captain Vance to reclassify every single missing ration, box of milk, and medical supply from the past month as a standard and acceptable operational loss incurred during intense combat maneuvers, effective immediately. As the general climbed back into his command car, leaving a humiliated, speechless Vance standing in the mud, a profound wave of relief and intense patriotic pride swept through the ranks of the infantrymen, cementing a legendary victory of human mercy over the cold, blind machinery of military bureaucracy. As the brutal, devastating winter of 1944 finally yielded to the fragile warmth of the spring of 1945, the roaring guns across a battered Europe fell completely silent, bringing an official end to the most destructive conflict in human history. The men of the 29th Infantry Division prepared for their long, emotional journey back across the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind the scarred battlefields and the slowly rebuilding ruins of St. Lo. Sergeant Thomas stood on the bustling deck of the transport ship heading home to Boston, his battle-weary eyes looking back at the receding European coastline with a profound sense of quiet peace. He was returning to an empty house, but the dark, suffocating grief of losing his own son had been replaced by a quiet, enduring light. He knew that deep in the heart of France, a little girl named Marie was alive, growing up safe because an entire squad of rugged soldiers had chosen to look past the cold mandates of military law. Captain Vance, the rigid bureaucrat, faded quickly into historical obscurity, his spotless boots and mathematical checklist completely forgotten by time. But the legacy of the GIs who chose human compassion over blind obedience remained permanently etched into the very soil of Normandy, turning an act of logistical insubordination into the truest, most authentic face of Allied victory. Decades passed, and the white plaster dust of St. Lo was slowly replaced by vibrant streets, new homes, and modern schools. But the older generation of French survivors never forgot the scrawny, hollow-eyed American boys who had shared their bread in the dark. Marie grew into adulthood, raising her own children in a free nation, forever preserving a headless, worn-out rag doll and the memory of the towering, mud-covered sergeant who had knelt in the freezing slush to offer her a simple bar of sweet chocolate. These stories of secret survival and unauthorized mercy were passed down through generations of Norman families, whispered around warm winter hearths as a testament to the idea that true honor in times of warfare is not measured by the number of enemies destroyed, but by the number of innocent lives protected. The strategic manifests of the High Command had long since been locked away in dusty government archives, but the spiritual pact forged between the liberating army and the civilian population remained an unbreakable bond, proving that the heartbeat of basic humanity can never be entirely crushed by the massive, cold machinery of global conflict. But as the final pages of history close on the tragic ruins of 1944, a deeply unsettling and haunting question echoes through the fractured landscape of our modern world. In a contemporary society dominated by cold, automated systems, advanced drone strikes, and a rigid culture of absolute compliance to corporate and institutional rules, do we as a civilization still possess the moral courage to rebel for the sake of mercy? If a modern soldier, public servant, or everyday citizen were placed in that exact same freezing mud, confronted by a strict, legal command to turn their back on a crying, starving child, would they have the internal strength to look their superiors in the eyes and choose humanity? Or has that unique, legendary breed of self-sacrificing warriors who understood that some laws deserve to be broken completely vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind a cold world governed only by numbers and blind compliance? We desperately want to hear your personal, honest thoughts on this forgotten chapter of human defiance in the comment section below. Do you believe that the raw, uncompromising moral fiber displayed by the GIs of St. Lo still exists in the hearts of the modern generation? Or has that sacred spark of true heroism been lost forever to the past? Drop your comments and let us know your deep theories down below. If this deeply moving journey through the hidden, emotional archives of World War II made you question the official narratives and reflect on the true meaning of courage, please hit the like button right now to support our independent historical research, to ensure you never miss another classified file, forgotten rescue mission, or deep investigation into the darkest mysteries that the official history books tried to completely sweep under the rug. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. Thank you for walking alongside us through the shadows of the past. Protect your conscience at all costs. Stay highly vigilant. Trust absolutely nothing. And we will see you in our next dark documentary investigation.